Hello, lovely listeners, and welcome back to the Skylight Books podcast. I'm your host, Natalie, and today we are so excited to welcome Akwaeke Emezi to talk about their new YA novel, Bitter. Akwaeke Emezi is the author of Pet, a finalist for the National Book Award for Young People's Literature, a Walter Honor Book, and a Stonewall Honor Book, the New York Times bestseller, The Death of Vivek Oji, which was a finalist for the Dylan Thomas Prize, the Los Angeles Times Book Prize, and the Penn Gene Stein Award. Freshwater, which was named a New York Times notable book and shortlisted for the Penn Hemingway Award, the New York Public Library Young Lions Fiction Award, the Lambda Literary Award, and the Center for Fiction's First Novel Prize. And most recently, Dear Centauran, a Black Spirit memoir. Their debut poetry collection, Content Warning Everything, is forthcoming in 2022. Selected as a 5 under 35 honoree by the National Book Foundation, they are based in liminal spaces. Thank you so much for being here, Akwaeke. I'm so excited to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
In this space with us, still liminal, virtual, somewhere.
Absolutely.
Did you want to start us off by reading a little something from Bitter?
For sure. We'll start from the beginning. Always a good place to start. Chapter 1. Bitter had no interest in the revolution. She was 17 and she thought it was ridiculous that adults wanted young people to be the ones saving the world, as if her generation was the one that had broken everything in the first place. It wasn't her business. She was supposed to have had a childhood, a whole world waiting for her when she grew up. But instead, kids her age were the ones on the front lines, the ones turned into martyrs and symbols that the adults praised publicly but never listened to, because their greed was always louder, and it was easier to perform solidarity than to actually do the things needed for change. It didn't matter. None of it fucking mattered. Bitter sat in her room and ignored the shouts from outside her window, the stomping of feet, the rhythmic chants, thousands of throats swelling to the same song. Lucille was a brutal city to live in. There had been mass shootings at the public schools, at the movie theaters, at the shopping centers. Everyone knew someone else who had died from something they didn't have to die from. Too many people had seen others die, even if it was in frantic live streams and videos, witnesses risking their lives and their freedoms to record the cops and their gleeful atrocities. Too many mothers had buried their children under a lethally indifferent administration. All of Bitter's friends were sick of it, and rightfully so. The world was supposed to have gotten better, not become even more violent, rank with more death. It was no wonder the people took to the streets, masses swallowing the roads and sidewalks, because in a world that wanted you dead, you had to scream and fight for your aliveness.
Oh, I love this book so much. I love Lucille. Oh my goodness. Okay. So I love that you started at the beginning, because we can kind of start there with who this book is about. So it exists within the same world as Pet, the book that came before it. So did you always know when you wrote Pet that you wanted to write about Bitter, Pet's mother?
Yes, well, Jam's mother. But
Jam's mother,
I
yes.
guess Bitter did
Not
make
Pet's
Pets.
mother, Pet's creator. Pet's creator.
Pet's creator.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I wrote Pets, it was meant to be the first book in a trilogy. So I was like, all right, I'm writing YA. I'm going to write a YA trilogy, the kind that, it's very convenient to adapt into a movie because there's 3 of them and then you get 3 movies. And I was like, this seems to be a useful formula. Let's do that.
Yeah.
And as I was writing Pets, there were just all these hints at the world that came before. I think one of my favorite ones is the scene where Pet reveals itself to Jam's parents And Jam is terrified because she thinks that, they're going to be so confused and furious.
Mm-hmm.
And instead, they are exasperated. They're like, oh
Like,
no, not again.
how did they get back here? Yeah.
And Jam's like, what do you mean, not again? And it's just kind of, there are all these breadcrumbs in pets
Mm-hmm.
that connect back to something that happened before. And I knew that I wanted to follow those breadcrumbs and really focus on Bitter, who is, after all, the one who creates Pet. In the book Pet, we focus a lot on Jam because Jam woke up Pet and because they have this bond, this relationship. But Jam didn't create Pet. And we see Bitter as an adult be kind of shut down to the whole idea of Pet, but we never got to see what made her that way. We never got to see what made Aloe so determined to never consider the possibility of monsters again. And it's clear that both of Jam's parents are dealing with some trauma around the revolution, and they just flatly refuse to talk about it. And so I wanted to dive right into the middle of it with this book.
Well, and it's my favorite kind of book in the sense that it tells a story that everyone is familiar with and knows and has heard a million times, but drops it into this world that may feel more accessible, or even though it's a imaginary world, a world that's more accessible because you don't have to face it head on almost. And so I wanted to just get a little bit of insight about Asada and Eucalyptus and the places that you built out from the original idea of Lucille, and how we got to a group of revolutionaries and radicals, young revolutionaries and radicals that we're seeing today too. And we've always seen, they've always been here, but giving them a voice in this book, as well as with Eucalyptus, giving kids who make art a place where people are looking for them specifically, not just encouraging them, but saying, this is what you are meant to do, and I'm going to give you a space to do it.
Yeah, recruitment, essentially.
Yeah, yeah.
Like you said, most of the revolutionaries that we know, even in history, are much younger than people actually realize. And the entire world of Lucille, both in Pet and in Bitter, was really inspired by Black community organizers working right now. Because for me, I think these organizers were the people who really gave me a vision of a better world and the fact that it was even possible. And, when you're talking about radical Black organizers, people often think they're pessimistic. And this has been pointed out before by other people, but they're really the most hopeful out of all of us, because you can't, suggest dismantling everything, prison abolition, all of this, without a hope that we can do better. And what people like to, I think, used to distract from that is this idea that by pointing out the failings of the current systems that are killing so many of us, that these people are, pessimistic and negative and can never see the good in anything. And it's like, there is no good to be seen in capitalism. There is no good to be seen in the prison industrial complex. These are things that need to be removed. There is hope in believing that we can do something else. And when I started, so Pet was obviously the first book I wrote in YA, and I wanted to write something with possibility. And the work of these community organizers was really what led me to that. There, especially with Bitter, where I was like, okay, well, what does Asata look like? You know, a community of radical Black organizers, with elders, with children, with a safe house that's, you know, magically protected, because if not, it would have been bombed a long time ago.
Mhm.
And I wanted to inject that possibility into the currentness of what's happening, because, and this might be surprising being as I write these books, but I have far less hope than the organizers do. And I think it shows even in writing the books, where I was like, even in my imagination is limited, because in my imagination, this could only happen with magic and otherworldly beings. Um, and this is why I have so much respect for radical organizers, because they're imagining it without all of that. You know, they're imagining it without pets, and they're imagining it without magical wards around the safe house. They're imagining it in a much harsher world. As terrible as Lucille looks in this book, in Bitter, the world we live in is worse, because there is no one coming to save us. It's it's just us. And I think it's such tireless work that radical Black organizers are doing to continue fighting for a better world against what's, even to me, seem like insurmountable odds.
Well, and you mentioned injecting possibility into this world and those ideas, and I wanted to see what kind of toll it takes to write that world, especially for children, because specifically one of the, I think it's a little bit towards the middle of the book, but no spoilers. You say Bitter just wanted to make her art and mind her business, but she could agree with Asada and Blessing that Theron was evil. And Theron is our capitalistic overlord.
Our resident billionaire.
Our resident billionaire in Lucille, and Blessing is Bitter's best friend. But there's adults have sort of been living with that feeling for a long time of, I just want to mind my business and do my things and not have to deal with this. I agree that it's bad and that we shouldn't have to participate in it or deal with it, but having to put that sort of disillusionment on into the minds of children, which they already feel it, they see it. And Pet was very much about acknowledging that they do see it and not gaslighting them into thinking that nothing is wrong. But does it take a toll on you to have to inject that hopelessness into them while situating them in this world of possibility as well?
I don't see it as injecting hopelessness into them, because I think it's like with Bitter, it's a reflection of what a lot of young people, I think, feel, mainly because young people are not exempt from trauma just based on their age. You know, they don't get to opt out of it until adulthood. And you know, you're looking at Bitter's background, where, you know, she's a foster kid. She's been raised by these kind of abusive adults who are, you know, really verbally abusive towards her and who really try to make her feel like she's worth nothing. And she tried to run away from them. She's tried so hard to find a safe place, and she's only 17. And at that point, you know, she's found Eucalyptus, and she's like, I'm done. You know, I don't want to go into unsafe places anymore. And I don't think that's injecting hopelessness. I think that's recognizing the fact that a lot of young people are dealing with a lot of trauma, right up until, Bitter's age, and then they're still having to reach, like, this threshold of you're an adult now, and now the world's problems are yours too. And especially, I think also the thing that some adults do of, well, the young people will save us. Like, this generation is going to be the one that's going to, like, we don't have to do anything because the one's coming up after us. And it's a lot of pressure, I think. And to have survived a traumatic childhood and gotten to a place where, she's discovered safety, and then to face this possibility of, well, you're going to be kind of ejected out into this world. And that's part of being adult, right? Of being an adult is you're on your own, go out into this world. And Bitter's like, I've been on my own. I don't want to do it anymore. So yeah, I think it's just a reflection of things. And I think it's important in literature for young people that we recognize that, hello, little
There's my
kitty
pet.
cat. I think in literature for young people, it's important that we recognize that, so many kids are not having little idyllic childhoods behind white picket fences where all the things in these books are, so other and so different. Like honestly, for me, I get really surprised when I hear of people who had like safe childhoods. I'm just like, I literally cannot relate. I
Yeah.
have no idea
Like,
what that's like.
I don't get it.
I'm like, I don't get it. And yeah, and I think that it's irresponsible, and this is not about Bitter, this is just about like young people's literature in general. I think it's irresponsible when we try to protect young
Mhm.
people from really harsh things that are happening to characters in literature for young people. Because what it says is that if you've had like these really, traumatic childhoods, then you don't deserve literature for
That,
you. Like the only people who deserve literature for them are people who, who need to be protected from this harsh life. And like we shouldn't expose them to it. We shouldn't make them uncomfortable by looking at it. And I'm like, well, what about all the kids who lived it?
yeah.
Like, what about them?
Well, and to that point, one of my favorite parts of the book, one of the most beautiful scenes was when Bitter is first spending some time with Aloe, and she is shutting down when something is wrong, which has just been her way. It's what she's decided was the best way for her to protect herself. And Aloe says, no, tell me what you're feeling. Tell me what's wrong. Let's talk about it. You can tell me. And I think it's like the end of a chapter, and it just ends with like, and like, so she did. She sat down and she told him. And it is, I mean, as adults, we continue to learn that, but I think especially now with all these things that pressure that you mentioned kids are facing to carry the weight of the world on their shoulders and be the ones to save us, they need community more than ever. And it's so important that they have that, and they have these beautiful, intimate friendships with each other where they are able to talk about what is wrong and what they're feeling, and not be shut down by adults, especially, and told that their concerns don't matter. So I wanted to just see if you could tell us a little bit about some of your favorite friendships in the book, or how you constructed them, and like building those relationships between all of them with even people who don't quite get along. So you have Alex, who was a part of Asada, and then went to Eucalyptus, and how they kind of decide to join the same side or understand that they are all ultimately after the same goal.
Oh, I have so many favorites because they're all my babies and I love
Yeah.
them so much. I love the relationship between Bitter and Eddie because Bitter is essentially a fuckboy. Like
She is.
like, you know, she's not like the victim in this. Like, no, she's an
No.
asshole.
Yeah. And
And
I was like, what happened there? And Bitter's like, nothing. I don't know. And Eddie's like, when you're done talking to trash, you can come back and see me. And I'm like,
and you know, and Eddie's justified in it because Bitter treated her like terribly, like and I really love that, you know, she's like, you know, she's forced to kind of confront that. I think it was also really nice for me to be able to write Bitter and Aloe's like the start of their relationship, um, particularly because I had written them as adults first,
mm-hmm.
and then I had to kind of work backwards and be like, huh, so who would Aloe have been as a teenager that would have led to who he is as a father in Pet? Um, and then one of my favorites is a relatively minor character, but she's like a little Easter egg breadcrumb situation. So Eddie's girlfriend, Malachite, who
Mm-hmm.
is never actually like seen like on screen on the page, but Eddie talks about her a lot, and you know, talks about how Malachite is kind of helping her access a more like wholesome way of living. Like, you know, she likes to bake bread. She takes Eddie out, I think, to this farm. Um, and the thing I love about it is that Malachite is one of Redemption's parents in Pets. And she
I
comes
did
back in.
not catch that. Oh my god. Okay, well, I know what I'm doing after we hang up here. Okay.
I hope that doesn't count as a spoiler because it's like a little
No,
character. I feel like it's a little treat.
it
But
is a
yeah,
treat. Oh my gosh.
Malachite is Redemption's mom, and obviously, you know, she's not with Eddie at that point anymore because she's an adult. But the first time we see her is when Redemption brings Jam into, like, they visit the family house,
Hmm.
and everyone's like the whole family's in the kitchen, and Malachite is baking bread
Baking
because she
bread.
still bakes.
Oh, my heart.
And you know, I really loved being able to write um, the younger versions of some of these characters, especially Ube. Like,
Hmm.
I really like he's one of my favorites, and I love that, you know, you see him in Bitter as this um, leader who's, you know, like an unofficial leader because they're like, Asafo doesn't actually have leaders. And then you get to compare like their young versions to the grown-up versions in Pet, and then you see, you know, how I just love the fact that, you know, he was at the front line of all of this, and then he ended up being a librarian.
Hmm.
In I can't pronounce that word, librarian. It's got a lot of
Yeah,
R's in it.
yeah, too many R's.
But he ends up being like, you know, this librarian in Pet who is really supportive of Jam. And I think also there's this kind of like ships passing in the night quality to it,
Hmm.
where if Jam had actually told adult Ube in Pet about what was going on, he would have known exactly what she was talking
Yeah.
about. And then you get to see what happens when like people don't tell the kids that the real history, like they don't tell them the truth, because then Jam had to go through this whole thing with Pets by herself. I mean, like with Redemption, but without the support of the adult community because her parents have shut down about it. And she just simply doesn't know that there are all these other adults who know what bitter can do and know that creatures can come out of art and know how to deal with them. So I think for me, that was like a thing you get to see about how it actually burdens like the kids more. It burdens Jam more because she just doesn't know what resources she has in like the community around her.
And you mentioned that they are passing like ships in the night, sort of, and I love that these books coexist with each other in a way, but you could read them in whichever order. So I wanted to ask if there was intention about that when you decided, you said, I'm going to make a trilogy and then they're going to be movies, because that's the way that it works out, and it's very simple and a formula that's tested and true. But they do coexist in this way where you could read about Bitter and then see how her life progressed, or you could read about Jam and then see kind of where she came from. So did you do that intentionally, and do you plan to sort of continue to build this world? Like you said, you really love Malachite. Could we like maybe see an expansion of Malachite or any of these other characters that you could write about Lucille forever, I'm sure, because it's your baby and you built it, and there is so much to explore there.
Well, I think with writing a sequel that's not a sequel, that's actually a prequel, um, I'm not good at writing in a linear form. And I think Pet was the first book where, in the book, everything actually happens in a straight line. Like
Mm-hmm.
everything happens in sequential, like chronological order. That doesn't happen in most of my books. And so once I wrote Bitter, I was like, oh, I see. You just put the non-linearity in the series, not in the actual books.
Yeah.
And it just kind of made sense in my head that way. I don't think I'm going to write a third book actually, because at first I thought the same thing you did, which is like, I can, write Lucille forever. And then I had to write Bitter. And it was weird because I really, really, really did not want to. It was
Mm-hmm.
really hard to write Bitter. And part of it is because I wrote Bitter in the summer of 2020. And it was really hard to write about like young Black organizers and activists on the front line when everything that was happening in real time as well.
Mm-hmm.
And also, my health was really, really bad. I became disabled a few years ago, and my illness progressed to a point where I could no longer type. I could no longer write. Um, and for me, I've been writing since I was 5. So to physically lose the ability to write either by hand or to type was pretty devastating, especially
Yeah.
because I was on deadline.
Yeah.
um, and and so I had one of my friends, Catherine Ajima Agard, who's also another writer. She, like, my community pitched in, so she would like be on Zoom with me, and we would go through, like the copy editing notes for Bitter, and she would type for me. Like she literally became my hand because I couldn't use mine. And and the one thing I was really relieved about is that, when I read back the book, I was like, oh, okay, this is a good book, because it felt like shit writing it. And I
Yeah.
was just really grateful that like I had practiced my craft to the point where I could still do justice to the work. Like I would have felt so much worse if I wasn't okay and then I wrote the book and then the book sucked because I wasn't okay. Like that would have
Yeah.
just made everything 1,000 times worse. So it was a real relief to be able to write it despite all the difficulties, despite how hard it was. Um, and then to be able to look at it and say, you know what, I told Bitter's story well. And I'm happy with the quality of this. And but I think because it was so difficult to write Bitter and I was going through so much trauma at the same time, um, it kind of tied up the Lucille series for me. It was like, I don't think I can write another book. I don't think I can step back into this world because
Hmm.
it was just really difficult.
And then Pet was written for young and all Black trans girls and women who you wanted to have a mirror and somewhere for them to see themselves where they were powerful and smart and strong and had could envision a world where they had agency, and could make these choices. And so I wanted to, and you've mentioned that a lot, so I wanted to see who you felt you were writing Bitter for. We've talked a lot about the young Black organizers as well. I think it might be them a little bit, but if you could talk about that and who you wanted Bitter to
Yeah.
be for, especially writing it, you say, while you were struggling so much to write it.
Yeah, I think definitely, for the organizers, the book is dedicated to Toyin Salo, because I don't know if I'm pronouncing her last name correctly, who was, as most people know, a 19-year-old Black organizer and activist who was killed, I think, while I was writing Bitter, actually. Hold on, let me check the dates, because that was part of what made writing it, really difficult. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
I would have to use my phone. The dates aren't in this dedication, but I'm fairly sure it was that summer, like June 2020, and that she was killed, and that was really hard because she was missing for a while. She was Nigerian. It hit like my community specifically, like
Mm-hmm.
quite hard. And I was like, I can't believe I have to write about kids like this, you know. But I wanted to, like I said, I wanted to do the story justice, um, and have it be kind of an homage to like all these young people who are working so hard for a world to fix a world they didn't break. Um, and and then I also wanted to, write it for Black queer kids. I love the fact that both Bitter and Aloe are queer. Everyone's queer, quite
I
honestly.
think everyone in this book is queer.
And I was just like, yeah, because
Yeah.
I get really bored by this idea of um, us being like other to some like cishet center. And I'm like, no, no, in this world, like this is our normal, you know? You you have these queer kids, you have, Bitter's best friend who's a queer hijabi, and and they're artists, they're trying to figure out all this stuff, and most importantly, they have each other.
Mm-hmm.
And that was, I think, something that was really special, is to be able to write community, both in Eucalyptus and Asata, and then show them kind of figuring out how to relate to each other and how to be in community across their like various communities as well.
And then we mentioned a little bit the sort of importance of art and making art and showing kids being able uh, to create and people encouraging them to do that. Do you have any advice for young people who want to make things or are trying to make things and maybe feel like they don't have the space for it, or no one has really given them the opportunity to do so?
I'm terrible at giving advice, mostly because I think that sometimes it feels like it. hmm, I don't actually think that I'm in an authoritative position to give advice because everyone, including young people, are dealing with a very, very specific set of circumstances. And I don't think that blanket advice works for that because, it's easy and it's pat to say, well, create with what you can and create with whatever's around you and just keep making. But that advice doesn't work for someone who, is dealing with a lot more things than we can imagine. It doesn't work for a young person who's like responsible for like a large swath of their family and just does not have the time or the bandwidth or the capacity to make stuff. And a lot of the obstacles that people are facing are based on like structural and institutional problems, and no amount of, little chunks of advice is going to actually change things on that level. So yeah, I'm bad at advice.
Well, my advice to them, for starters, would be to read Pet and Bitter, to imagine, to be able to imagine this world and to see it. And I'm so excited to get Bitter into the hands of our customers here at Skylight, and to just put it everywhere. Oh, and also before I forget, I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about the beautiful cover art for both by Shauna Golden, I think.
Shyama
Golden, because they are beautiful, beautiful portraits. And I did want you to just tell us a little bit about how they came about.
Sure. So we worked on Jam first, obviously, and that was really cool because I think there's two covers for that. There's the cover where you see more of Lucille in the background. Yes. And then there's the paperback cover where you see more of a close-up of Jam's face. And we actually took the paperback design from Faber's publication in the UK. So for the US first edition, we did like Jam full body with Lucille, and then Faber in London did the close-up of Jam's face for their first edition. And I was like, oh, that's really cool because you really get to like connect, you get to see her face and you get to connect with it a little bit more. So we kind of stole that design and we're like, we're doing that for the paperback too. And then when it was time for Bitter, I was like, I would like it to be close-up as well. And I wanted them to kind of model, so I asked Shyama to model Bitter's face a little bit on Toyin Silo, who the book is dedicated to kind of make it look, like not a portrait, not a reproduction, but just like they were related, like they were cousins. Because there is this, I think, sense of connectedness between these young activists. And the cool thing about the cover for Bitter, which I have the UK edition, not the UK galley here. The cool thing about the cover,
it's got the gold foil on it too, so it's shiny.
Yeah, they put a lot of gold in the UK edition. The cool thing about the cover is that the cover was actually designed before I had finished my edits. So I think we were like in copy editing first pass when I got the final cover. And so I added a scene to the book where Blessing, Bitter's best friend, who's a photographer, is making a portrait of Bitter. And I had her, and I wrote the cover into the book. So I have, so Blessing, tells Bitter how to stand, holding up a paintbrush, and Bitter's like, this is just a little bit on the nose. And, and Blessing has like, painted this backdrop for Bitter to stand in front of. And so, she takes this portrait of Bitter, which is something they've been doing since the start of their friendship, is kind of, sharing their art with each other. And I really liked this idea that, to incorporate Shyama's art into the story of the book itself. And this idea that as we're looking at Bitter on the cover, we're looking at her as seen through the eyes of a best friend.
Oh, I can't wait to go reread it now. I'm gonna just go, and I don't know which order, if I should reread Bitter and then Pet, or the other way around. There's so many, you've
I think
injected
pets
possibility
first.
into the reading experience as well, which is so beautiful. Akwaeke, thank you so much for chatting with me today about Bitter and Pet in the world of Lucille. We are so excited to have Bitter on our shelves. This will come out a little bit before the book is out, but if you haven't already pre-ordered your copy, you can do that at Skylight Books. Thank you again so much to our guest, Akwaeke Emezi. And not just Bitter, but they have so many things for you to look forward to this year. So we are so excited to get them all on our shelves. And thank you again for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.